After my aunt's death, I inherited an old Singer sewing machine, while my sister received a luxurious 4-bedroom apartment in Moscow City. When my husband found out, he called me useless, the one even her own aunt didn't want to leave anything to, and threw me out on the street. Desperate, I decided to take the machine for repairs, but when the technician saw it, he turned pale and murmured, "Do you know what you have in your hands?" His words left me breathless. My legs gave out. The gray clouds hanging low over Milwaukee that morning mirrored Emily's state of mind. At 38 years old, she had long learned not to expect much from life. Still, when the letter from the attorney's office arrived with news of her great-aunt Margaret's passing, something deep inside her stirred, a spark of connection to the only family member who had ever truly seen her. The reading of the will was held in a small law firm downtown, a building that still smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Emily sat on the edge of a stiff leather chair, clutching her frayed coat around her. Her younger sister, Allison, arrived in a sleek black trench coat, high heels clicking against the marble floor like declarations of triumph. She didn't acknowledge Emily, merely sat beside her with the practiced indifference of someone who'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of pretending others didn't exist. The attorney, a tired-looking man with rimless glasses and a permanent frown etched into his forehead, opened the folder slowly, as if the weight of Margaret's final wishes pressed down on him. "To Allison Green," he read, "I leave the apartment at 86 Madison Avenue, New York City, along with all its contents, including the artwork and jewelry collection. May it serve you well." Allison smiled faintly, folded her hands in her lap, like a queen receiving tribute. The room grew still. "And to Emily Green." The attorney hesitated. Clearing his throat, Emily sat up straighter. "I leave the Singer sewing machine, model number 221, stored in the attic of my home. May you remember the value of what is handed down through care, not coin." The silence that followed was deafening. Allison's lips curled in disdain. She didn't bother hiding the smirk. Emily, stunned, barely registered the closing of the file or the brief condolences offered by the lawyer. By the time she stepped outside into the chill of late autumn, the weight of Margaret's gift pressed down on her like a cruel joke. A sewing machine, not even a house to put it in, just an object from another era. Her phone buzzed. "Brad, come home now." He snapped the moment she answered. "We need to talk." She didn't respond, just listened to the cold wind whip through the alley beside the law office. When she arrived home, Brad was waiting by the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. His blue eyes narrowed as he stared her down. "Well," he asked. Emily set the envelope on the kitchen table. "Margaret left me a sewing machine." Brad stared at her like she'd grown 2 heads. "That's it? Allison gets a luxury apartment in New York, and you get a damn antique?" Emily nodded, already knowing what was coming. Brad threw his arms in the air. "You're pathetic, Emily. Even your own family thinks you're worthless." "Brad, no. I'm done carrying dead weight. You bring nothing into this house. You work part-time at a library that pays peanuts, and now this? This proves it. Your own blood gave you junk, because that's all you're worth." She stood in the kitchen, numb. She had stopped crying years ago, stopped fighting even earlier. She looked at the man she once thought she loved, the man who had slowly turned her into a ghost in her own life. "I want you gone by tomorrow," he said. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply walked up the stairs to the attic, where the dusty Singer sat beneath a moth-eaten blanket. She picked it up, surprisingly heavy in her arms, and left the house without looking back. The streets of Milwaukee looked different now, every corner unfamiliar. She wandered until night fell, stopping only once to rest on a bench outside a closed bakery. The machine sat beside her like a loyal dog, silent and immovable. She ran her fingers along its edge. There was something comforting about it. Something solid. The next morning, she rented a tiny room above a florist's shop downtown with what little savings she had left. The landlady, Mrs. Pruitt, didn't ask questions, just handed over the key and a worn set of sheets. Emily placed a Singer on the corner table beside the dusty window. It looked like it had been waiting for her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Memories of Margaret flooded her mind. The smell of cinnamon tea in her kitchen, the way she spoke in riddles, her hands always working on a piece of fabric. Emily remembered sitting on the floor as a child, watching her great-aunt stitch dresses with unwavering focus, each movement precise and graceful. Margaret used to say, "Stitches carry secrets. Emily, don't let the world tell you what they're worth." Now, alone in a foreign-feeling city with nothing but a vintage sewing machine, those words felt like a riddle and maybe a map. The next morning, as the sun bled through cracks of the blinds, Emily decided to take the machine into the city. It wasn't just sentimentality. She needed to know why Margaret had chosen this for her. Why this old relic instead of money or property? Why something so specific? She found a small repair shop a few blocks away, Donovan's Fix-It, the kind of place that still displayed transistor radios and typewriters in the window. Inside, the air smelled of oil and old paper. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped in. An elderly man with a white beard and suspenders looked up from behind the counter. His eyes landed on the singer in her arms, and something shifted in his expression. He stepped closer slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice rough but trembling. Emily hesitated. "It belonged to my great-aunt. She left it to me when she passed." The man reached out, brushing his fingers gently over the base of the machine. "Do you know what you have?" he whispered. Emily stared at him. The room seemed to hold its breath. And for the first time in her life, so did she. The old man didn't take his eyes off the singer, his weathered fingers still resting lightly on its side. His voice cracked with disbelief as he turned it slightly, scanning the serial number engraved near the base. "Model 221, he murmured. "But this isn't just any featherweight." Emily stood still, her coat still damp from the drizzle outside. She shifted uneasily under his gaze, unsure she should say something, unsure what she was even supposed to feel. The machine had always looked ordinary to her. A relic, maybe, a memory, nothing more. The man finally looked up, and his eyes were wide now, not with wonder, but with something closer to dread. "Name's Donovan," he said. "People just call me Mr. Donovan. I've been fixing machines like this for over 50 years. But I've only ever seen one like this. Once, a long time ago. And I never thought I'd see it again." Emily frowned. "You're saying you've seen this exact machine?" "No, not this one exactly. But another made the same way. Same construction. Same tiny mark on the belt plate." He tilted the machine delicately and pointed to a faint, almost invisible symbol that looked like a triangle with a circle inside. "See that? That's not from the Singer factory. That's military." Emily blinked. "Military? But it's a sewing machine." Donovan nodded solemnly. "That's what I thought too. But back in 1968, I was stationed overseas. Germany. Worked logistics, repairs. We had a shipment of confiscated wartime items, mostly junk. Radios, typewriters, field gear. Among them was a machine exactly like this. The officers said it was part of a disinformation program. Code weaving, they called it. That symbol there? It marked the items that were enhanced." Emily was struggling to follow. "What does that mean exactly?" Donovan reached behind the counter and pulled out a pair of magnifying glasses, slipping them over his eyes. He began inspecting the underside of the Singer, running a small brush across the worn metal. Then he stopped, leaned in closer, and pried open a tiny panel near the power cord inlet. Behind it, hidden in the frame, was a small rectangular space, barely large enough to hold a book. It was empty. Donovan stepped back, letting out a long, slow breath. "There was something in here once," he said. "A compartment. Hidden, clean cut, precise. Not factory made. This was altered by someone who knew what they were doing. The machine itself still works. Probably like new with a little oil. But this wasn't made to sew dresses." Emily stared at the opening, heart pounding. "Do you know what was in there?" He gave her a long look. "Not exactly. But the one I saw in Germany had blueprints inside. Technical stuff. Not the kind of thing you'd hand over to just anyone. It was labeled M. Singer and had a stamp, Operation Atlas." The name hit her like a gust of wind. "Wait, you said Operation Atlas?" That's exactly what my friend Rachel found written in a notebook. We thought it might be, I don't know, just some old reference. Donovan's expression turned grim. It's not a reference. It was classified. Highly. Only reason I even saw the label is because one of the officers let it slip after a few drinks. And then the next day, that machine disappeared. So, did the officer? Emily felt cold in her bones. You think this machine is part of that same program? I don't think, Miss Green. I'm certain. She looked down at the Singer, at the place where the hidden compartment had once held something important. And for the first time, she realized this machine was far more than an heirloom. It was a message, a puzzle. I have to find out what it means, she said, more to herself than to Donovan. He nodded slowly, taking off his glasses. You'll need to be careful. Whatever your aunt left you, it wasn't meant to be shared lightly. Can you fix it? Make it work again. He considered her for a moment, then gestured toward the back of the shop. Leave it with me overnight. I'll clean it up, make sure everything's working properly. But Emily leaned in. Don't tell anyone else you brought it here. Don't show it to anyone. Not yet. She hesitated, then nodded. I won't. As she left the shop, the wind picked up, tugging at her coat. She pulled it tighter, the city suddenly feeling colder. Her boots clicked against the pavement, echoing across empty sidewalks. Something had shifted. She could feel it in her chest. The Singer wasn't just a remnant of the past. It was a key to something buried, something dangerous. That evening, she met Rachel at a coffee shop not far from the university where her friend taught. The walls were lined with books and photographs of European cities. Rachel, with her always disheveled bun and oversized sweater, looked more curious and alarmed when Emily told her what Donovan had said. He used the term Operation Atlas II? Rachel asked. Emily nodded. And he found a compartment. Empty. He said there used to be something in it. Rachel leaned back, tapping her fingers against a ceramic cup. I looked up that term last night. There's barely anything on it, just vague references in some Cold War archives. But the name M, Singer, came up more than once. I thought it was coincidence. It's not. Rachel grew quiet. Then she pulled her satchel onto the table and retrieved a few photocopies of pages from the notebook Emily had shown her. Look at this, she said, pointing to a sketch of a sewing machine almost identical to the one Emily inherited. This isn't just a user's manual. It's a blueprint. Emily leaned closer. The lines were meticulous, drawn with an engineer's precision. Embedded within the design were notes in a code neither of them could decipher. But in the corner of the page, almost obscured by smudges and faded ink, was a phrase in English. Trust only those who mend. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Sound familiar? Emily felt the words settle in her, like a stone sinking in deep water. Margaret had said something similar once, years ago. She never understood what it meant. Now it sounded like a warning. Do you think Margaret knew what this was? Rachel didn't hesitate. She left it to you, didn't she? Not to Allison. And she made sure it was hidden away. That wasn't by accident. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of conversation around them growing distant. Then Rachel said, We need to figure out what was in that compartment. What it was for. If this is tied to military operations, then someone else might be looking for it too. Emily nodded slowly. Then we better stay ahead of them. She left the cafe that night with the notebook clutched tightly under her coat. Outside, a figure across the street watched her from the shadows, face obscured by a turned-up collar and dark hat. When she glanced his way, he turned and walked off, blending into the crowd. Emily's steps quickened. The feeling of being watched hadn't left her since she walked out of Donovan's shop. Back in her rented room, she locked the door and closed the curtains. She set the notebook on the table and opened to the first page. The name M, Singer, was written at the top in sharp, clean handwriting. Below it, coordinates, dates, names she didn't recognize. She stared at them for hours, tracing each one with her finger. Somehow, Margaret had known she'd be the one to follow the thread. And now, she was starting to see why. The next morning, Emily returned to Donovan's workshop just after it opened. The bell above the door gave a small, familiar chime, and the warm scent of oil and worn leather greeted her like an old friend. Mr. Donovan looked up from the back of the shop, where he was hunched over a table filled with tiny gears, screws, and parts too precise for ordinary machines. "She's ready," he said before she could even speak. The singer sat neatly on a bench to his right, gleaming faintly under the workshop's yellow light. It had been cleaned, polished, and carefully restored. The metallic sheen along its edges made it look less like a household item and more like a relic from another world, an artifact hiding behind disguise of the familiar. Emily stepped closer and ran her fingers along the now smooth surface. It was warm to the touch, like it had been waiting to be brought back to life. "I oiled the drive belt and replaced the plug," Donovan said, wiping his hand with a rag. "But I also found something else. Not in the machine, in the lining of the case." He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small, fabric-wrapped object. Inside was a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed but unbroken. Across the front was a name written in looping cursive, Thomas Greer. Emily stared at it. The name matched one she had seen in the notebook Rachel had decoded, one of the few names repeated several times, always alongside strings of numbers, dates, and city names. She hadn't known who he was, until now. "Was it Margaret's handwriting?" she asked. Donovan gave a single nod. Same hand that labeled the maintenance notes under the base plate. Emily held the envelope carefully, not yet ready to break the seal. Something told her that opening it would shift things again, as if each discovery opened a new door, but never without closing another behind her. She left the workshop with the envelope tucked deep inside her coat pocket, the singer now resting inside a rolling case Donovan had loaned her. The wheels bumped over the sidewalk as she walked, the weight of it both grounding and ominous. The city seemed quieter today, the hum of traffic distant and dulled, as if the world itself was waiting. Back in her room, she placed the envelope on the table beside the notebook. She studied the handwriting, the slant of the ink, the pressure of the pen strokes. Margaret had written it with care, not in haste. Whoever Thomas Greer was, he mattered, and Margaret had trusted him with something, maybe everything. Emily took a breath and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a letter dated June 3rd, 1944. It began with a greeting that made her breath catch. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, it means our time is almost out. The borders are closing and the plans are set in motion. I only pray that what we've hidden won't fall into the wrong hands. The machine is ready. You know what it carries. The coordinates are encoded in the stitch pattern. 12 threads, 6 colors, 3 rotations. You'll understand what to look for. If I don't make it, make sure it gets to the right people. Not all enemies wear uniforms." Emily read the paragraph twice, then a third time. She couldn't understand all of it, the terms, the cryptic references. But one thing was clear. Margaret had been part of something far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The second page was a map of northern France, with several mark points around the region of Rouen and Caen. Each one was numbered and circled, but none explained. The third page was a list of names, several of which had been blacked out with thick lines of ink. Only 2 remained legible, Thomas Greer and Marion Voss. Emily turned back to the letter, trying to connect the fragments. The mention of coordinates embedded in a stitch pattern struck her as both brilliant and unsettling. Margaret hadn't just used the machine to carry documents. She had turned it into a cipher. The machine wasn't a container. It was a code. She called Rachel immediately. "You found a letter?" Rachel said, excitement rising in her voice. "That's huge. What does it say?" Emily read her the lines carefully. Rachel was silent for a moment. Stitch pattern. That sounds like something she literally sewed. You still have the samples she left. There were scraps in the machine case. I didn't think they mattered. They might be everything. Emily retrieved the cloth swatches from a machine's side pocket. They looked innocent enough. Small squares of beige and navy linen, each with a different geometric pattern embroidered into it. Flowers, lines, triangles. But now she looked closer. One in particular caught her eye. 12 threads running vertically, intersected by 6 colored horizontal ones, in red, blue, green, yellow, black, and white. 3 of the rows appeared to have been unraveled and resewn, barely perceptible to the eye. But with the letter as a guide, the message came into focus. "It's a code," Emily whispered. She wasn't joking. The coordinates, they're stitched in. Rachel confirmed her suspicion later that day, matching the colors and thread counts to a variant of the military tap code used in prisoner of war camps. When decoded, it revealed partial coordinates, likely a meeting point or drop site. But more importantly, it confirmed that Margaret had worked actively with someone inside the intelligence community. Thomas Greer, Emily said. We need to find out who he was, where he went. I'll check the war archives, Rachel offered. But if he was military, there's probably not much that's public. Not unless he wrote something or had relatives who kept records. That night, Emily dreamt of Margaret, young, in a field of tall grass, sewing something under a clear blue sky. The hum of the machine was soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. But when Emily looked closer, the sky turned gray, and the field was surrounded by barbed wire. Margaret looked up, eyes hollow, and whispered, not all enemies wear uniforms. She woke up with the echo of the words still in her ears. The next day, Rachel sent her a name. A university archive in Ohio held letters written by a Thomas Greer, a former intelligence liaison stationed in Europe during the war. According to the records, he went missing in 1945, presumed dead. Emily stared at the message for a long time. Missing, presumed. But what if he hadn't died? What if he'd gone underground? What if Margaret had known? A new urgency gripped her. She packed the Singer, the notebook, the letter, and the stitch cloths into a duffel bag. She called the bus station and bought a ticket to Columbus, leaving the next morning. She didn't tell Rachel. She didn't tell anyone. That night, as she walked to the pharmacy for travel supplies, she passed a man in a dark coat standing at the corner of her block. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But when she glanced back, he was gone, back in her room. The window had been cracked open. She was sure she had locked it. The message in Margaret's letter circled in her mind like a warning bell. Not all enemies wear uniforms. She locked the door, then shoved a chair beneath the knob. Tomorrow, she would find out what Margaret had risked everything to protect, and who had been waiting all these years to take it away. The bus ride to Columbus was long and uneventful, passing through endless stretches of farmland and quiet towns that barely stirred as the vehicle rolled through. Emily kept her duffel bag clutched against her knees, eyes darting from one window to the other, constantly checking for signs she was being followed. The man near her building hadn't reappeared, but his presence lingered in her thoughts like a stain she couldn't scrub away. She arrived just before noon, stepping out into the cool summer air near the city's central terminal. From there, it was a 15-minute walk to the university, where she had arranged access to the Greer letters through a visiting researcher's credential Rachel had quietly borrowed for her. It was risky, but Emily knew this was the only way to move forward. The university archives were housed in a tall brick building with wide marble steps and a bronze plaque listing donors from over a century of institutional pride. Inside, it smelled of dust, paper, and ink, a scent that comforted her in its familiarity. The archivist, a tall woman with clipped speech and large glasses, handed Emily a box labeled TG Collection, 1943 to 45. You'll need to sign this release form, the woman said. No photos, no removal of materials. If you need a copy, request duplication through our formal process. Emily signed the paper with a shaky hand and took the box to a long wooden table near the back of the reading room. The box creaked as she opened it. Inside, dozens of letters were bound in paper sleeves, each marked with date and a recipient. Most were addressed to someone named Marianne Voss. The name was on the list she had found in Margaret's envelope. She began reading. The first letter, dated April 12, 1944, was stiff and formal. Greer addressed Marianne as Miss Voss and referred to military briefings, concerns over troop movements, and encrypted communications that needed further testing. But by the third letter, his tone had changed. The formality gave way to familiarity, fragments of emotion slipping to the edges of duty. Marianne, I received the parcel this morning. The mechanism is brilliant, simple, yet invisible to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. I showed it to no one. It's ours now. Emily's pulse quickened. The parcel, the mechanism. Could he be talking about the Singer? Or another like it? She flipped through several more letters. now reading them out of order, looking for anything that tied Greer to Margaret. And then she found it in a letter dated August 19th. Margaret has delivered the final pattern. It's stitched into the linen you saw last week. I will pass it through the contacts in Lyon as soon as I verify the numbers. If anything happens, the duplicate will remain hidden in Milwaukee. No one must find it unless they know how to read the threads. Her breath caught. There was proof that Margaret and Thomas Greer had worked together, that they had created duplicates, that what Emily held now wasn't just one of a kind, but part of a system, a network of silent, hidden couriers. She copied the key lines into a small notebook of her own, then carefully returned each letter to its original sleeve. Before she closed the box, something caught her eye, a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the lining at the bottom. She slipped it out with gentle fingers. It wasn't an official document. It was a sketch, a drawing of the Singer machine, much like the one in Margaret's notebook, but annotated in Greer's blocky handwriting. He had marked points beneath the chassis, small hollows and channels where thread could be passed in patterns not used in typical stitching. Along the margin, a single sentence was underlined twice. Coordinates are only half the message. Movement reveals the rest. Emily stared at the phrase. Movement. Was it possible that the sewing pattern itself changed meaning when the fabric was physically moved? She hadn't considered that before. Back in Milwaukee, Rachel had only analyzed the colors and thread counts, but her positioning altered the message. The complexity of the code was greater than they'd realized. She snapped her notebook shut and packed her things. Before she could leave, the archivist intercepted her. "You're not affiliated with the university, are you?" The woman asked, her tone sharp. Emily froze. My friend is a researcher here. She got me access. I needed to." "You shouldn't be in here," the woman said. "I don't care who your friend is. This archive is restricted. I understand. I was just leaving." As Emily turned, the archivist leaned in slightly. Someone else came asking about those same letters. A man, tall, dark suit, said he worked for a foundation in Washington. I told him they were restricted, just like I'm telling you, but he knew exactly what box he wanted. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She left the building without speaking another word and took a cab straight to the bus station, heart hammering. The man in the dark suit had found the letters, or had nearly found them. That meant he knew about Greer, and now maybe he knew about her. By the time she returned to Milwaukee late that evening, she was too exhausted to think clearly. She climbed the stairs to her room, expecting silence. Instead, her door was cracked open. She froze. No sound, no footsteps, but something was off. She pushed the door open slowly, expecting to find drawers pulled out, paper scattered. Instead, everything was untouched, except for one thing. The Singer was gone. The duffel bag still sat in the corner. The notebooks were in place, but the machine was no longer under the window. Emily's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She checked every corner of the room, opened the closet, looked under the bed. Nothing. And then she saw it. On the table where her notes had been was a small black card with embossed silver lettering. Preservation Department. Agent Blake. No number. No address. Just the name. She stared at it, fingers trembling. She didn't know how they had found her so quickly. She didn't know what they wanted beyond what the Singer carried. But the message was clear. They were watching. They knew. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her bed, eyes on the door, clutching Margaret's letter in one hand and Greer's sketch in the other. The game had changed. The Singer was gone, but she still had the cloth, the codes, the names, and now, more than ever, she was determined to finish what Margaret had started. She wasn't just holding on to a legacy. She was being hunted for it. Emily hadn't spoken to her sister in over 2 years, not since a bitter falling out over their father's funeral expenses. They had shared grief then, but not compassion. And when the will had been read, the divide between them had turned into a chasm. Still, that morning, with the Singer machine stolen and the Preservation Department's warning card burning a hole in her coat pocket, Emily stood outside Allison's apartment building in downtown Milwaukee. The doorman recognized her immediately, but didn't greet her. He pressed a button, muttered her name into a speaker, and nodded silently as the elevator door slid open. Emily braced herself during the ascent, her palms damp with sweat. She hadn't come for reconciliation. She came for the truth. Allison opened the door with a cold smile, already dressed in an elegant silk blouse and tailored pants, a cup of espresso in one hand. "Well," she said without moving aside, "to what do I owe the unexpected pleasure of your presence?" Emily didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped past her and into the apartment, letting the door close behind her. The space was bright, modern, and filled with designer furniture. A skyline view stretched across the far windows. The kind of life Emily had never imagined for herself. "I know about Margaret," Emily said quietly. Allison raised an eyebrow. "You'll need to be more specific." "I know many things about her, most of them rather boring." Emily turned to face her fully. "I know about Thomas Greer. I know about the singer. I know Margaret wasn't just a seamstress. She was involved in something during the war. Something secret. And you knew too. That's why she gave you this apartment. You kept quiet." Allison's smile vanished. She moved to the kitchen counter and set down her cup with exaggerated care. "What exactly have you gotten yourself into?" "I should be asking you that." Allison folded her arms. "You really think I want any of this?" "I beg her not to involve me. She left me that apartment to keep me silent." "Yes, and I took it because I wanted no part in her delusions." "She wasn't delusional," Emily snapped. "She risked everything for something real. I've seen the letters, the codes. I found Greer's correspondence in Ohio. And now the machine's been stolen. Someone came into my room and took it." Allison's face paled just slightly. "Stolen?" "By someone calling themselves the Preservation Department. A man named Blake left a card." At that, Allison finally looked shaken. She sank onto a stool at the kitchen island and rubbed her forehead. "They came to me once," she said, almost in a whisper. "Years ago, before Margaret died. I was still living in Chicago. A man in a gray suit knocked on my door and said he worked for a National Preservation Initiative. He asked if I'd seen any old Singer machines, any documents. I thought he was from a museum, but he wasn't. What did he want? He kept talking about something called the Atlas Line. Said certain families had been entrusted with machines that carried information too dangerous to be archived traditionally. I told him I knew nothing. And not long after, Margaret sent me the deed to this place. No explanation, just a note that said, 'Stay quiet, stay safe.' I listened." Emily paced across the room, tension tightening every muscle in her body. "So, you never asked questions? Never wondered what she was protecting?" "I didn't want to know," Allison said, "because knowing would have made me responsible. And I wasn't built for responsibility. You were." Emily stopped walking. "You think I was a responsible one?" "You were always the one she trusted," Allison replied, her voice laced with both bitterness and resignation. "You followed her around as a child. You asked her about her work. You cared about what she did. I just wanted out." Emily sat down across from her. "Then help me now. You owe me that much." Allison was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and walked to a small drawer beneath the bookshelves. From it, she pulled a narrow box, velvet-lined and old-fashioned. She placed it between them and opened it. Inside was a sewing thimble, heavy and metallic, unlike any Emily had ever seen. Etched along its edge was a pattern of tiny grooves, almost like Morse code. "I don't know what it means," Allison said, "but Margaret gave it to me when I was 18. She said it was just in case. I think it's part of the system you're trying to unlock." Emily picked up the thimble and turned it in her hand. The weight of it was surprising, real, and the markings, now that she looked closer, weren't random. They were coordinates. "She encoded location data on this," Emily murmured. "It's a map." "Then I suggest you go wherever it leads," Allison said, standing again. "And I suggest you don't come back." There was no anger in her voice, only fear. Emily left the apartment with the thimble wrapped in tissue and stored deep inside her coat. She didn't look back. Later that night, she met Rachel in an all-night diner near the edge of the city, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease no matter what time of day it was. She showed her the thimble, and Rachel's eyes lit up with fascination. "We can scan this," Rachel said. "I know someone at the university who works with historical cartography. He's discreet. If these marks represent real coordinates, we'll find the site." They spent the next hour tracing the grooves onto paper, comparing them with the partial coordinates from the stitch pattern. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. The destination wasn't in Milwaukee. It wasn't even in Wisconsin. Emily tapped a point on the map, where the coordinates converged. "Whitmore, Indiana," she said aloud. Rachel frowned. "There's nothing there. I mean, it's practically a ghost town." Emily leaned back in the booth, the weight of her decisions pressing against her chest. "Then it's exactly where we need to go." Rachel looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll go with you." "No," Emily said. "You've already been targeted once. You lost your job because of this. I need you on the outside, researching, connecting dots, watching for anything I miss. If something happens to me—" "Don't say that," Rachel interrupted. "But if it does," Emily continued, "you'll be the only one who knows the truth." The two women sat in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of coffee cups surrounding them. Outside, the sky began to lighten faintly, the promise of morning on the horizon. Emily left the diner just before dawn, thimble secured in her pocket, resolve burning in her chest. Whitmore waited, and whatever secrets lay buried there, she would uncover them, even if it meant becoming a target again. Whitmore was even smaller than Emily had expected. The two-lane road that cut to the heart of the town looked more like a long driveway than a highway, flanked on both sides by abandoned storefronts and boarded-up homes. Rusted mailboxes leaned sideways like weary sentinels, and the post office had a handwritten sign on the window that simply read, "Close until further notice." She pulled her rental car to a stop outside the only open establishment in town, a gas station with a diner attached. The neon sign buzzed faintly against the early morning gloom. Inside, the place was quiet, save for the low hum of a television mounted near the counter. A single man sat at the far end of the room, hunched over a newspaper and nursing a cup of coffee. Emily ordered nothing, only asked the woman behind the counter if there was a library or town records office nearby. The woman, older and unimpressed, pointed a thumb toward a building across the street with dusty windows and a faded sign, Whitmore Municipal Records. The records building was barely more than a converted home. Emily stepped inside and was greeted by the musty scent of old paper and mildew. A young clerk sat behind a desk, typing aimlessly, clearly not expecting any visitors that morning. "I'm looking for information about a property," Emily said, keeping her voice low. "Singer Manufacturing, factory or warehouse, closed in the 1950s. Anything on the building or who owned it before it shut down." The clerk gave her a puzzled look, but led her to a back room filled with filing cabinets and thick ledgers. The search took almost an hour. Finally, in a book labeled Commercial Transfers 1952 to 1956, she found a line that made her heart leap. Lot 19B, Parcel 921, former Singer Industrial Storage. Transferred June 2nd, 1953. Buyer, M. Greer Holdings. Greer. The name again, now as a formal buyer. She jotted down the address, located on the outskirts of town, and returned to the car. The roads grew narrower as she drove west, the houses vanishing until she was surrounded by empty fields and skeletal trees. Eventually, she found it, a long brick structure partially obscured by overgrown brush and rusted fencing. The front doors were chained shut, but one side window had a broken pane just large enough to crawl through. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old oil. Shelves lined the walls, many of them still holding rusted tools, spools of thread, and broken bobbins. In the center of the room stood a work table covered in mold-stained fabric. As she moved through the space, Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracked windows. There was a door in the back, a heavy steel one with a circular locking mechanism unlike anything used in ordinary factories. She hesitated, then turned the wheel. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. She pulled a flashlight from her bag and descended. The basement was cold. The walls were concrete, and the ceiling hung low. She walked slowly, sweeping her light across the floor. And then she saw it, a metal vault, built directly into the far wall, its face covered in grime and faintly visible symbols. The pattern etched into the door matched the markings on the thimble. Emily knelt, holding the thimble against a panel. There were indentations that aligned perfectly with the grooves. She turned the thimble slowly, aligning it with the marks, and then heard a click. The vault door shifted with a hiss of released air. Inside, a collection of meticulously preserved folders and tins were stacked in a metal shelving unit. She reached for the nearest folder. Inside were photographs, sepia-tone images of men and women posing in front of train stations, trucks, homes. Most were marked with names and dates. Some had the letters ER or AP scrawled in the corners. Others had no labels at all. Behind the folders were tightly sealed tin boxes. One contained film reels. Another rows of microfiche. A third held a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon, each bearing a European postmark. She opened one, dated March 24th, 1945. We made it to the border. The children are safe. Your instructions were precise. The route you provided allowed us to pass undetected. Bless you. I do not know your name, only your initials, MS. Emily's hands trembled as she read. She was surrounded by evidence of a secret operation. Margaret hadn't just been a courier. She had facilitated escape routes, mapped passageways, and tracked lives. These weren't documents. They were testimonies of people saved. As she reached for another folder, the faintest sound made her freeze. A footstep, deliberate and muffled, echoed above. She turned off the flashlight and crouched behind a stack of crates. A moment later, the heavy door creaked open. Light from a flashlight swept across the stairwell. She could hear slow, purposeful steps descending. She held her breath, heart racing. Miss Green, a voice called softly. Male, measured. Emily didn't respond. I don't want to frighten you. My name is Blake. I believe we've nearly met once already. The voice was closer now. She could see a shadow stretching across the concrete floor. I work with the Department of Preservation. We're not enemies, Miss Green. Quite the opposite. We want to keep people like your great-aunt safe from being erased. She remained silent, listening. She helped us, Blake continued. She knew the risks, and she trusted that one day, someone in your family would finish what she started. That's why she gave you the machine. The words struck her like a hammer. They were rehearsed, too smooth, and there was something in his tone, a lilt that suggested manipulation, not reassurance. I know you found the vault, Blake said, and I know what you're looking at, but you must understand something. If that information goes public, lives will be destroyed, not just reputations. Real lives. The people who protected Margaret, who funded those escape routes. They weren't all saints. Some made compromises. Some made enemies. This is bigger than you realize. Emily stood slowly, her mind racing. She stepped around the crates and faced a man now standing at the base of the stairs. He wore a dark trench coat and held his flashlight like a weapon, even though his expression remained calm. You took the Singer, she said flatly. We had to. It's part of the archive. It was never meant to leave controlled hands. And the letters? The codes? You let those stay hidden for decades. Blake stepped closer. Because history isn't always written by the right people. Sometimes it has to be protected, curated. Emily shook her head. You mean controlled? He didn't answer. Who do you work for? She asked. Blake studied her for a long moment. People who understand that truth is dangerous when handled carelessly. She glanced at the shelves behind her, at the proof, the lives, the journeys, all of it nearly erased. I won't give this to you, she said. You already have, Blake replied, nodding subtly toward the small recorder in her coat pocket. She reached for it instinctively and found it missing. You were never supposed to find any of this, he added. But now that you have, we'll be watching. With that, he turned and walked up the stairs, footsteps unhurried. Emily didn't follow. She stood in the dim light of the vault, adrenaline still surging through her veins. Blake hadn't taken the files. Not yet, and that meant she still had time. When Emily emerged from the factory basement, the sun was just beginning to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the empty lot. Blake was nowhere in sight. The road back into town felt longer this time, the weight of what she carried, both physically and mentally, growing heavier with each step. She had stuffed 3 of the folders into her bag, careful to take only the ones directly connected to names she had already seen in Margaret's notes. She didn't know how long she had before Blake came back, or how many eyes were watching. At the edge of Whitmore, she found a payphone bolted to the side of the gas station. She fed it coins and dialed Rachel's number from memory. The line rang 5 times before a friend picked up, voice tired and cautious. "It's me," Emily said. "I found it. Everything Margaret hid. The documents, the records, even film reels. It's all here." There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "For now." But Blake showed up. He followed me in, said I was endangering lives, that Margaret worked with them. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe, but I don't trust him." "What do you want to do?" Emily glanced over her shoulder. The sky had turned from gold to gray. "I need a place to go. Somewhere no one knows about. Somewhere I can go through these records without being followed." Rachel hesitated, then said, "There's a cabin. Belongs to my uncle. He hasn't used it in years. It's deep in the woods outside Madison. No neighbors. No signal. I'll send you the directions." An hour later, Emily was back on the road. Driving west in a borrowed truck, she convinced a local mechanic to rent her under the table. She took only what she needed: Margaret's notebook, the coated cloths, the thimble, the stolen folders, and a portable film viewer from the vault. Everything else she left behind, hoping it would distract whoever came next. By the time she reached the cabin, it was well past midnight. The structure was small and unassuming, tucked between tall trees and wrapped in silence. She let herself in and lit a few candles, avoiding the overhead light to keep her presence discreet. The inside was dusty but intact, bookshelves lined with outdated novels, a fireplace filled with cold ash, and a kitchen which can food decades past its expiration date. She sat at the table and opened the first folder. Inside were detailed accounts of escape operations conducted between late 1944 and mid-1945. Each mission was logged by date, region, number of individuals rescued, and route used. A few included photographs of children, most with coded names. One particular entry caught her eye: Operation Delphinium. The document listed a convoy that moved across Belgium under cover of night, guided by falsified German credentials created in part using stitching patterns embedded in household items: napkins, handkerchiefs, the linings of coats. The designs had been sewn on Singer machines. Her Singer machine. Emily leaned back, overwhelmed. Her great-aunt hadn't just been a link in the chain. She had been instrumental, a creator of codes, a mapmaker in thread. She turned to the next folder. This one contained testimonies, handwritten letters from survivors. Many were addressed MS, some simply began with "to the one who saved us." The letters spoke of fear, of running, of hiding in train compartments and abandoned churches. One came from a woman named Elise B., who had carried her infant son across the Pyrenees with nothing but a pack of cloth swatches sewn into her coat. The code had guided her step by step. Without it, she would have walked into an ambush. Emily read for hours. When dawn crept over the window ledge, she had only gone through 2 of the 3 folders. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. Later that morning, she stepped outside and buried the folders in a waterproof case beneath the floorboards of the woodshed. She couldn't keep them in the cabin, not with Blake somewhere out there. Inside again, she prepared to view the film reels. The portable viewer was slow, but functional. The footage was grainy, black and white, and mostly silent. It showed lines of people moving through narrow streets, hand signals exchanged, children hiding in crates, and stitch banners fluttering in windows. Messages in plain sight. And then Margaret appeared. Emily sat frozen as her great-aunt, decades younger, came into frame. She was standing beside a table, thread in hand, demonstrating a sequence to a group of women. Her movements were calm, precise. She didn't smile, but her eyes were fierce with purpose. The reel ended abruptly. Emily rewound it and watched again. Her hands trembled as she reached for a notebook and began transcribing what she saw. The hand positions, the thread order, the finished pattern. That evening, someone knocked at the door. It wasn't Blake. A woman in her late 60s stood on the porch, wrapped in a worn coat and holding a folded envelope in one hand. "You're Emily Green," the woman said. "Yes," Emily replied, wary. The woman nodded. "My name is Nora Brandt. Margaret saved my family during the war. I was only a child, but I remember her. And I remember what she said when she brought us through the forest." Emily said nothing, waiting. She said, "One day, someone will pick up this thread and sew the rest of the truth. Don't let them cut the cloth before it's finished." Nora held out the envelope. "She asked me to give this to the person who came looking." Emily took the envelope with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a single page. A photograph of Margaret and a man Emily didn't recognize, tall, strong-featured, in uniform. Written on the back in Margaret's handwriting were 3 words. "He never left." Emily looked up. "Who is he?" "Thomas Greer," Nora said. "But he was declared missing." Nora shook her head. "He changed his name, stayed in hiding. He lived near Whitmore under a new identity until he passed away in 1996. Quiet life. No children. No mention of his past." Emily's thoughts raced. "Do you know where he lived?" "Yes, I can show you." They drove together back toward Whitmore. A small farmhouse stood just off a wooded trail, long abandoned but still intact. Inside, Emily found boxes of books, faded photographs, and in one drawer, a sealed envelope marked for her. She opened it. "Margaret, if you're reading this, then it means the work is finished. Or perhaps just beginning again. I don't regret what we did. I only regret that I never got to grow old with you in the open. But the world wasn't ready. If she comes, your niece, tell her this. The truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes it only needs to be sewn quietly, one thread at a time." Tidji. Emily stood in the stillness of the farmhouse, heartbreaking and filling at once. The story hadn't ended with war. It had continued in silence, in hidden lives, in unspoken grief and loyalty. Now, it was her story to carry forward, and she was ready. The farmhouse felt heavy with memories as Emily closed the envelope from Thomas Greer, her fingers lingering on the faded ink of his final message. The afternoon sun filtered through cracked windows, dust particles dancing like tiny ghosts. Outside, the wind rustled through dead leaves, whispering secrets Emily was only beginning to understand. She had unearthed a past buried not only by time, but by deliberate silence. As they drove back toward Milwaukee, Nora remained quiet, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The weight of the years seemed to press down on her, and Emily could tell the memories she carried were painful. She didn't press for details, not yet. That night, Emily spread all the documents she had gathered across the dining table in her small rented apartment. The folders from Whitmore, Greer's letters, Margaret's notes, the coded cloth, and the photographs were a mosaic of courage and danger sewn together by time. Yet, something gnawed at her, a feeling that they were closer to the edge of something more sinister. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. "Urgent. Someone has been asking questions about you at the university. They want to know who accessed the Greer collection. Be careful." Emily stared at the screen. The shadow of pursuit had lengthened. She was no longer just uncovering history. She was entangled in it. The following day, she met Rachel at a cafe on the outskirts of town. Rachel's eyes were wide with concern. "They're serious," Rachel said quietly, glancing around. "Security services, historical foundations, even private collectors. The people involved with these archives are tightly connected, and Blake isn't the only one watching." Emily nodded, feeling the walls close in. "So what now?" "I have no machine, no physical proof, just these papers and your help." Rachel tapped a finger on a particular letter. "This one," she said, pointing to a faded page from Greer's collection, "mentions a person named Walter Fisher. He was a post-war archivist with ties to intelligence. Rumor is he helped suppress parts of the war record. If we can find out more about him, maybe we can understand who wants to keep this buried. Days passed with little progress. The trail to Fisher was cold. Few records, fewer leads. Emily's hope wavered, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let the sacrifices of her great-aunt and Thomas Greer be erased. Then came the night of the break-in. Emily was home, studying a cross-reference between the stitching patterns and encoded locations, when she heard a faint crash from the back room. Her heart jolted, muscles tensing instantly. The floorboards creaked beneath cautious footsteps. She reached for her phone, but it was gone. The door to the dining room slowly opened, revealing a tall figure cloaked in black. A mask obscured the face, but the eyes glinted sharply in the dim light. "Miss Green," a voice said, smooth and cold. "You're meddling in things better left alone." Emily didn't respond, her mind racing. "I'm here to retrieve what belongs to us," the figure continued, stepping closer. "The singer, the documents, everything." "Not everything," Emily said firmly, stepping back toward the doorway. The intruder's gaze flickered to the scattered papers. "You're risking lives. These secrets have power beyond your understanding." "I'm risking nothing but the truth," Emily answered, "and I won't let you silence it." There was a tense moment. Then the figure lunged, swift and desperate. Emily dodged, knocking over a chair. The struggle was brief but fierce. She managed to push the intruder toward the window, which shattered with a crash. The figure stumbled out, disappearing into the night. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She sank to the floor, hands shaking. The break-in was a warning, a threat made real. The next morning, the police were unhelpful, dismissing her report as a home invasion attempt gone wrong. But Emily knew better. The past wasn't just knocking on her door, it was trying to break in. Determined to stay one step ahead, she decided to return to Whitmore. There were unanswered questions she had to face, about the factory, about the vault, and about the shadowy forces moving against her. With Rachel's support from afar, Emily packed her things again. The thimble, the notebook, the photos, all carefully concealed. This time, she wasn't just searching for history. She was preparing to confront the secrets that refused to stay hidden. As she drove into the dusk, Emily realized that the past was no longer a distant shadow. It was a living force, chasing her through time, weaving a dangerous web that threatened to unravel everything she believed in. And she was ready to fight back. Returning to Whitmore felt different this time. The abandoned town wore a heavier silence, as if the ghost Emily chased had multiplied, waiting for her arrival. The road to the old Singer factory was lined with brittle trees, whose branches clawed at the sky, and the wind carried an eerie stillness that pressed against her like a warning. She parked the rental car near the edge of the property and unfolded the worn notebook Margaret had left her, a leather-bound journal with fragile, yellowed pages brimming with delicate handwriting and cryptic symbols. Emily had spent countless hours poring over it, but here in the quiet shadows of the factory, the words seemed to pulse with renewed urgency. The notebook was more than a record. It was a map, a guide stitched together with memory and code. Each page held clues to the hidden patterns Margaret had sewn into her work, patterns that transcended fabric and thread, becoming a silent language of survival and resistance. Emily traced her finger over a page filled with embroidered diagrams and notes. One sketch stood out, a series of interlocking triangles, each containing a series of numbers and letters. Underneath, Margaret had written, "When the fabric moves, the truth reveals itself." The phrase echoed in Emily's mind like a key to a lock she hadn't yet found. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the decaying building, Emily noticed a fold in the corner of the page. Carefully, she unfolded it to reveal a faded map of the Midwest, with several towns circled and connected by lines, some straight, others curved, resembling threads woven to the landscape. Her breath caught when she saw Whitmore marked with small red dot at the center. Beside it was an annotation in faint ink, "Last known transmission." The notebook's pages seemed to hum beneath her touch, each symbol beckoning her deeper into the mystery. She flipped to a different section and found a collection of letters written in a coded cipher. The patterns mirrored those in the stitched cloth, and the numbers corresponded to dates she had seen before. Emily realized that the notebook wasn't just a diary or a ledger. It was a living document, a cipher itself. Every stitch, every notation was a piece of a larger puzzle. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her pocket, a sharp intrusion into the eerie quiet. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some truths are meant to stay buried. Her hands shook as she stared at the threat. Someone was watching, and they weren't bluffing, determined not to be intimidated. Emily tucked the notebook into her bag and ventured deeper into the factory's ruins. The place had changed little since her last visit, but with a fading light, it felt more hostile, as if the walls themselves whispered warnings. Near the rear of the building, she discovered a narrow door partially hidden behind rusted machinery. The lock had been broken, the door hanging ajar. Inside was a small room, once a makeshift office. Emily's flashlight illuminated a desk covered in dust and a filing cabinet with several drawers left open. She rifled through the papers, uncovering maintenance logs, shipment records, and a series of personal notes. Among them was a worn envelope labeled simply MS. She hesitated, then pulled it out. Inside was a letter addressed to Margaret, dated December 1944. The letter was brief but revealing. Dear Margaret, the operation proceeds as planned. We've arranged safe passage for the next group through the marked locations. Be cautious. The enemy is closing in, and there have been rumors of mole within the network. Trust no one outside your circle. Yours in secrecy. T.G. Emily's pulse quickened. Thomas Greer's initials. The letter confirmed what she had suspected. Their mission was fragile, constantly under threat. As she continued searching, she found a leather pouch containing several small metal tags engraved with codes, numbers and letters matching those in the notebook. She realized these tags might have been used as identifiers or keys for members of the operation, or perhaps to mark locations. Her mind raced as she pieced together the implications. The network Margaret and Greer had created was vast and intricate, built on trust, deception, and silent signals woven through ordinary objects. Hours passed as Emily documented everything, carefully photographing the documents and sketches. The notebook's cryptic message about movement lingered in her thoughts. She tried shifting the embroidered cloth beneath her flashlight, noticing how the threads cast subtle shadows, altering the patterns with each fold. Then, a sudden realization hit her. What if the code only revealed its true meaning when the fabric was worn or manipulated in a certain way, like a message invisible until activated by motion? Eager to test this theory, Emily unfolded the cloth and began to move it in various directions, twisting, folding, and stretching the embroidered patterns. Slowly, a sequin emerged. A series of letters appeared when the fabric was viewed from certain angles, like a hidden script waiting to be uncovered. She quickly jotted down the letters. Farewell. The word struck her as both poignant and puzzling. Farewell. Was this a message from Margaret? A warning? A goodbye? Before she could dwell further, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the factory, distant but unmistakable. Emily froze, heart pounding. She grabbed the notebook and the embroidered cloth, stuffing them into her bag. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low murmur of voices. Someone was coming. She slipped out through a side door, careful not to make a sound, and melted into the shadows outside. The figures appeared, 2 men dressed in dark clothes, scanning the area with flashlights. Emily held her breath, ducking behind a rusted barrel as they passed mere feet from her hiding spot. Once the men disappeared into the night, she slipped away into the woods, her mind racing with questions. Who were they? Agents like Blake? Private collectors? Or something more dangerous? Back at her rental car, Emily's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time accompanied by an image, a photo of the factory's interior, taken from somewhere inside. You're not alone. We see everything. The threat was clear, but so was Emily's resolve. The threads Margaret had left weren't just memories, they were lifelines, and she would follow them no matter where they led. Her journey was far from over. Emily's hands trembled as she turned the key in the rusty lock of the vault door deep beneath the abandoned Singer factory. The sound echoed through the cavernous space like a summons from the past. The metal groaned and shifted, revealing the cavern of secrets that had been sealed for decades. Inside the vault lay shelves heavy with dust-covered boxes, metal tins, and carefully wrapped packages. The air smelled of damp paper and old leather, but beneath it all was the undeniable scent of history, of sacrifices made in shadows and whispers. Emily flicked on her flashlight and began to explore. She ran her fingers over first box, which bore the emblem of the Allied forces, and a faded stamp, Confidential. Inside, she found meticulously folded map marked with routes, coded drop points, and handwritten annotations in multiple inks. The handwriting was unmistakably Margaret's. Pulling out another container, Emily uncovered a collection of faded photographs. Faces of men, women, and children stared back at her, smiling, frightened, hopeful. Several had the initials MS inscribed on their backs, along with dates ranging from 1943 to 1945. Some were taken near railways, others in small European villages. Among the photographs was one that caught Emily's eye, Margaret standing beside a young man in military uniform, both smiling but exhausted. Behind them was a truck loaded with crates. On the back of the photo was a simple note, Operation Atlas, the beginning. Emily's breath caught. She carefully placed the photograph on the table and continued searching. In a metal tin labeled communication devices, she found a compact, intricately crafted radio transmitter, its casing engraved with the same triangular symbol she had seen on the Singer's sewing machine. It was small enough to fit inside a pocket, designed for covert use. The discovery confirmed everything she suspected. Margaret's machine had been more than a sewing device. It was a hub, a tool for espionage and communication. Her fingers traced the transmitter's buttons, imagining how many lives had depended on such tiny objects hidden in plain sight. Suddenly, a crumpled folder fell from a shelf, revealing a stack of yellowed papers tied with twine. Untying the bundle, Emily found a collection of coded messages and cipher keys. She spread them out, trying to make sense of the complex codes. Some were grids of numbers and letters. Others were sequences of colored threads represented by symbols. It was a language designed to be indecipherable to anyone without the key, until now. Hours passed as Emily painstakingly matched the codes to the stitching patterns from Margaret's notebook and the embroidered cloth she had recovered. Slowly, the messages began to emerge. Lists of safe houses, names of couriers, locations of hidden supplies. Then she found something that stopped her cold, a report dated May 20th, 1945, detailing an intercepted communication that suggested the presence of a mole within the network. The report warned of potential exposure and the need for immediate relocation of key personnel. Emily's mind raced. The mole explained the rumors Thomas Greer had mentioned in his letters. The paranoia, the constant danger that had shadowed their mission. But the most chilling discovery lay in a sealed envelope marked with a blood-red X. She hesitated before opening it, as if touching a fragile wound. Inside was a list of names, people who had been captured or disappeared during the war. Among them was Margaret's name, marked with a note, presumed lost if compromised. Emily's throat tightened. The cost of their secret was far greater than she had imagined. She gathered the documents, photographs, and devices, her heart heavy but her purpose clear. As she prepared to leave the vault, her flashlight flickered and dimmed. The silence around her thickened. Then, from the shadows, a soft click. Emily froze. Footsteps echoed behind her, deliberate and slow. Miss Green, a familiar voice called out. Blake stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "I see you found the heart of the operation," he said. Emily stood her ground, clutching a photograph to her chest. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "To ensure that these secrets do not fall into the wrong hands," Blake replied. "You are playing with fire." "And you?" Emily countered. "Who are you protecting? The truth or the lies?" Blake smiled thinly. "Sometimes the line is blurred. But I promise you, the world is not ready for everything you carry." Emily's gaze hardened. Then maybe its time it was. The tension between them crackled, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Blake nodded. "We will watch you, Emily. But for now, you have our attention. Choose your next move carefully." He turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily alone once more. She exhaled slowly and looked around the vault, realizing that the past was no longer buried. It was alive, demanding reckoning. With new resolve, she packed the precious documents and artifacts. Her gray tant's legacy was now hers to protect and to reveal. Emily returned to Milwaukee under a blanket of stars, the weight of the vault's secrets pressing heavily on her shoulders. Each mile felt like peeling back the layers of her family's hidden history, revealing more than she had ever anticipated. But nothing had prepared her for the revelation awaiting her back home. Her small apartment was quiet. Too quiet. No signs of forced entry. No obvious disturbance. Yet, as she moved through the rooms, something felt off. Her eyes caught a manila envelope resting atop her kitchen table, stark and out of place against clutter. With cautious fingers, she opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, some old, some recent. One showed her great-aunt Margaret in her youth, smiling softly beside a man Emily didn't recognize. Another showed a young woman strikingly similar to Emily herself. Same eyes, same jawline, posing in a sunlit garden, laughing with someone who bore the unmistakable features of Thomas Greer. Emily's heart pounded. The notes scribbled on the back of the photos revealed a connection deeper than anyone had ever told her. Allison. The message was clear. Allison knew. And more than that, Allison had been involved. The thought shattered something fragile inside Emily. Before she could gather her thoughts, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Emily," said a voice cold and controlled. "I'm glad you found the vault. It's time you knew the full truth." "Who is this?" she demanded. "Someone who knew your great-aunt well. Someone who's watched over you from the beginning." Emily's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" "To offer clarity. To explain why Allison received the apartment and you got the machine. You think she stayed silent out of fear or greed?" "No, she was part of the plan." The line went dead. Emily sank into a chair, the room spinning. The next morning, she confronted Allison. At first, Allison denied everything. Then, under Emily's relentless gaze, she revealed the truth. Margaret had recruited both sisters. Allison had been trained to protect the legacy from within society's upper echelons, using her position and wealth to guard secrets quietly. Emily had been chosen to carry the physical pieces, the machine, the codes, the history. It was a division of labor, a bloodline pact. Allison wasn't silent because she was indifferent. Emily said, voice thick with emotion. She was protecting us all. But at what cost? Emily whispered, "How many lives have we lived because of this?" Allison's eyes softened. "More than I care to count. But our family story isn't just about secrecy. It's about survival." Emily spent the days that followed piecing together fragments of their shared past. Letters hidden in family Bibles, whispered conversations between aging relatives, photographs tucked away in forgotten albums. Each discovery stitched them closer, unraveling the complex tapestry of sacrifice and loyalty. One afternoon, Allison handed Emily a worn leather journal, a personal diary belonging to Margaret. Inside, Margaret's voice echoed across time. "To those who inherit this burden, you must choose your own path. The threads I wove were meant to protect, but also to guide. Trust in your heart, and know that blood binds more than just flesh. It binds purpose." Emily closed the diary, tears streaming silently down her face. The legacy was not a curse. It was a charge. Together, the sisters vowed to honor it. United at last by the truth, the world outside Emily's small apartment seemed indifferent to the storm brewing within her. The legacy of her great-aunt Margaret, once a distant whisper, had transformed into a roaring call for justice and recognition. With Allison now by her side, the sisters began to stitch together a plan, one that would bring light to the shadows of their family's history and honor the courage that had been buried for decades. The first step was to find platform. Emily reached out to journalists, historians, and activists, anyone who might listen. The initial responses were lukewarm. After all, what could a story about a sewing machine and cryptic wartime codes possibly mean in a world saturated with news and spectacle? But then, a small local paper picked up the thread. The Milwaukee Gazette ran a feature titled "The Secret Stitch," a family's hidden history of war and resistance. weaving Emily's discoveries with rare photographs and excerpts from Margaret's letters. The article sparked curiosity, but more importantly, it ignited conversations. Within days, the story went viral. Social media buzzed with hashtags and discussions. Historians debated the significance of Operation Atlas. Museums expressed interest in the Singer machine itself. Survivors' families reached out, sharing their own stories of escape and survival, their gratitude echoing through Emily's inbox. Emily and Allison found themselves thrust into the spotlight, speaking at universities, attending panels, and being interviewed by national news outlets. Their voices, once muted by family secrets, now carried the weight of history and hope. Yet, with visibility came resistance. Emails filled with threats and dismissals arrived. Anonymous calls warned them to stop digging, to forget what had been uncovered, but the sisters stood firm. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emily received a message from an old contact, Mr. Donovan, the repairman who had first recognized the machine's significance. "I've restored more than machines," the note read. "I preserve stories." "Keep going, Emily. The world needs to hear this." Bolstered by newfound allies, Emily began organizing an exhibit, partnering with the National Museum of American History to showcase the Singer sewing machine alongside the letters, photographs, and artifacts uncovered in Whitmore. The exhibit's opening was a quiet affair, attended by historians, family members of survivors, and a few journalists. As the ribbon was cut, Emily felt the weight of generations on her shoulders. The Singer sat in a glass case, its once faded surface gleaming under the lights. A plaque bore Margaret's name and a dedication to those who stitched together hope in the darkest times. After the ceremony, Emily stood before a crowd and spoke with a voice steady and clear. "This is more than a machine. It is a symbol of resilience, of courage, of the countless unsung heroes who risked everything for freedom. My great-aunt Margaret's legacy is a reminder that even the smallest threads can hold a fabric of history together." Tears welled as the audience applauded. Outside, in the quiet after the event, Allison approached her sister. "You did it," Allison said softly. "We did it," Emily corrected. Their bond, once frayed by secrets and distance, was now unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to grow. Documentaries were commissioned, educational programs developed. The Singer became a beacon, a testament to the power of hidden histories and the importance of remembrance. Emily knew their fight was far from over. The forces that had sought to bury the truth still lingered, but now they were met with voices raised in defiance. And Emily's voice was among them. She had inherited more than a machine. She had inherited a mission, and she was determined to see it through. Months had passed since the exhibit's opening at the National Museum of American History. Emily found herself standing in the grand hall, the Singer sewing machine encased in glass, bathed in soft, reverent light. Around her, visitors moved slowly, their faces reflecting awe, curiosity, and reflection. This was more than display. It was a monument to resilience, to hidden courage, and stories finally told. She watched as a group of school children listened intently to a guide recounting Margaret's tale. The agent, the seamstress, the hero who had risked everything in silence. Emily's eyes welled, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here, from the dusty attic with a forgotten machine to this moment of recognition. Beside her, Allison smiled quietly, their earlier estrangement now replaced by a shared pride and a profound sisterly bond. The past that had divided them had, against all odds, become their greatest unifier. As the crowd thinned, Emily was approached by a historian whose research had been instrumental in uncovering additional documents related to Operation Atlas. "Emily," he said, "the impact of your story has been immense. Universities want to include it in their curricula. Survivors' families have found closure. You've changed the way we look at the war, through the eyes of the unseen." Emily nodded, humbled, but the story did not end here. One afternoon, she received a letter, handwritten, delicate, from an unknown sender. It contained a single photograph, Margaret, younger and vibrant, standing beside a man Emily recognized from the farmhouse, Thomas Greer. But this time, the image was different. Margaret's hand rested on a small box, intricately carved and locked. The note read, "For those who carry the thread forward, The true legacy is yet to be revealed. Curiosity ignited once more. Emily set out to find the box. With Allison and Rachel's help, she traced its location to a private collection in New York, connected, ironically, to Allison's inherited apartment. The owner was an elderly woman, a distant relative who had kept the box hidden for decades. After weeks of negotiation and legal steps, the box was transferred to a museum, and Emily was the first to open it. Inside were letters, personal diaries, and artifacts that revealed another layer of the operation. Codes sewn into quilts, messages embedded in children's toys, and detailed account of those who had been saved, including entire families who had vanished from records. These revelations reshaped history yet again, proving that Margaret and her allies' work had been more extensive and compassionate than anyone had realized. Emily knew then that her journey was far from over. She and Allison dedicated themselves to preserving this legacy, not only through exhibits and lectures, but through active community work. They established a foundation to support descendants of those saved and to educate future generations about the power of quiet courage. In time, Emily stood again before the Singer machine, this time as a guardian of its story, knowing that the threads of the past were woven into the fabric of the present and future. She had inherited more than an old sewing machine. She had inherited a purpose, and through her voice, her determination, and her love for her family, that purpose would never be forgotten